protest against racism. You are live with BBC News. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has vowed to bring more destruction on Ukraine in retaliation for a drone attack on the central Russian city of Kazan on Saturday. Mr. Putin accused Ukraine of carrying out a massive assault that struck a luxury apartment block located more than 1,000 kilometres from the Ukrainian border. Earlier, I spoke to Michael Bociurkiw, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Michael, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. I'd like to start with those comments from the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He was pledging retaliation after Ukrainian drones struck residential buildings in the city of Kazan in Russia. What are people in Ukraine anticipating? Will it deter those Ukrainian strikes that we've been seeing into Russia?
I don't know what psychologists would say about this one, but when it's normalized so much among a population after 3 years of war, whether that's a good or bad thing, we don't know. But of course, the good thing here, Helena, is that people are continuing with running their businesses, nurturing their families, births and marriages and things like that. But for sure, the statement from Mr. Putin the other day that he plans to use not one, but several of those Orishnik experimental high-powered missiles onto decision-making centers like Kyiv, of course, worries people. And every time there's a incredible Ukrainian drone strike like the one in Kazan in the past 24 hours that hit luxury apartment buildings, the Ukrainians, I think, are pretty much now conditioned to expect some kind of retaliation.
Well, let's touch a little bit then on the situation on the battlefield, because Russia has accelerated its advance across eastern Ukraine in recent months. So I just wonder, do we know anything more about Ukrainian strategy here, efforts to counter that, all very cognizant of the fact that there will be a change of administration here in the United States soon, which could also alter support levels?
Yeah, a couple of things there is that indeed the Russians are making ground. In fact, they're closing in on a very strategic center in eastern Ukraine, already a major factory that makes the raw material for aluminum has closed down, which will really hit the Ukrainian economy hard. And I think the Ukrainian response to all of this is, if we can't beat them on the battlefield, especially in terms of numbers, because mobilization is a problem, there's simply a lack of human hands there to fire a lot of the equipment, that they're going to ramp up technology and hit Russia through these high-powered, long-range drones. In fact, the Ukrainians are now heading up to production of drones to about, I believe, 200,000. That's a lot. And some of them are even literally being made on the kitchen tables of civilians. Such is the enthusiasm and desire of Ukrainians to strike back at Russia.
And there are also reports that the number of Ukrainian prisoners of war executed by Russia is rising. We've had reporting as well from the BBC on that. Is that something that you are hearing? What more can you tell us about that?
Well, it just should not only remind Ukrainians, but it should tell the world of the extent of the brutality of the Russians, that these are, of course, actions that are barbaric actions that are against the Geneva Conventions, against humanitarian law. And the way in which these prisoners are being executed is absolutely horrible, some actually beheaded. Now, the difference, of course, is that there's a lot of evidence being collected, including by Ukrainian observation drones, that these events actually took place. They've been geolocated, including by the BBC. So when it comes to the end of the war and war crimes prosecutions, there's going to be a lot of evidence at hand, and that should worry the Russians. But the numbers are horrendous. I believe we're headed to about 170 or so confirmed executions of POWs by Ukraine's ombudsman.
And of course, this war isn't just being fought on the ground or in the air. It's also happening in cyberspace as well. Ukraine recently suffered a major cyber attack. How are people there recovering from that?
Well, it was pretty bad. I mean, I received a lot of messages last night about it. It's one of the worst that's been inflicted upon Ukraine by the Russians. It actually paralyzed registration of marriages, of property sales, of car sales. And according to one or two sources of mine, the Russians were able to get into the database where names of people about to be mobilized are listed. you see, the problem, of course, that makes this worse is that Ukraine is such a highly digitized society. Everything is online, and this has been a great thing in the war because Ukrainians are very mobile. They have their documents basically stored on their smartphones, but then in a way it also makes them more vulnerable.